didn't bring any slides, so I guess I'll keep using Sam's very attractive slide. It is also my pleasure to provide some words in honor of Alberto. I want to thank Tom and the USSP organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about Alberto's work. As you can imagine, it's sort of a difficult task to describe the richness and breadth of his work, considering the limited time that I have. So please forgive if I just be able to highlight some of what I would consider his achievements. In addition to all the contributions that Sam already described, perhaps a major accomplishment of Alberto's work has become the foundation for understanding the demography of Latin America. He's one of the major works that he has pursued. I remember as a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, my first encounter with population issues in Latin America came from papers written by Alberto. I think this is a common experience for most of us who are interested in Latin American region. I remember very clearly when I read his paper on the demography and health conditions of aging in Latin America and the Caribbean. I was struck by the clarity on how he connected demographic theory and methodology with population dynamics. In that paper, he used 3 indicators of population aging. I'm going to call them simple indicators just because of the fact that they were not complex, not because they were simple in the sense of being, mathematically useless. They were actually relatively simple, and yet I was impressed by his elaboration of the implications and connections of these indicators with population aging in Latin America. You might remember the 3 indicators, quite simple: mean age of the population, fraction of older adults, and the rate at which those older adults were growing. I began reading his prior work, and little by little his writings began to shape and influence my own ideas. I remember reviewing several of his papers, thinking probably his other papers are going to use similarly not complex indicators. What a surprise I received when I began reading his early work. And I think my experience is not unique in how Alberto's work has been fundamentally transformed the study of demographic change in Latin America. I really cannot imagine a paper on population processes in Latin American populations without it referencing Alberto's work. In the particular areas of mortality, health, and aging in Latin America, it is just, I think, impossible to write something without first reviewing and citing Alberto's work. As I trace back Alberto's work, I realized his advances to demography and population studies started actually quite early. I'm going to organize the rest of the little things that I'll say a little bit based on that sort of encounter that I had as I began tracing back some of the work that Alberto did. I'll describe a little bit of his methodological advances, and then I'll move into the advances that he's done on the study of demography of change in Latin America. I was also very impressed when I read some of the work that in the late 70s, actually, when he began publishing papers on indirect techniques. That was quite popular back then. Indirect techniques to estimate infant and child mortality, and with Sam Preston, he wrote, for instance, one of the first papers, sort of a sequence of papers on BRAS technique, the BRAS type of mortality estimates using surviving children. He also wrote one of his early papers looking at Latin America, one paper in 1979 on a technique to estimate infant mortality with application for El Salvador and Colombia. In the 80s, he continued with his work on mortality estimation, and in particular issue of estimating completeness of the registration in early childhood. He studied research and analysis on interbirth intervals of breastfeeding and contraception, as Sam already showed, and provided a large push on the demography of Latin America. If you look at his papers, about 1/3 of the papers that he published in the 1980s are actually related to the population issues in Latin America. And 1/3 of about 40 or so papers. So that was quite a large production on Latin America. Just to mention also one example of his contributions, in collaboration with Larry Heligman, he collaborated and participated in the construction of set-model life tables for developing countries. That was a major undertaking that Sam had already started a few years earlier. In the 90s, as Sam also mentioned, Alberto began contributing on the demography and epidemiology of HIV/AIDS multi-state models. And that's another major innovation for some of us who are also sort of mathematically, technically inclined, that he included innovation in event history analysis, in particular on duration-dependent models. He merged into household size and structure and demographic responses to economic fluctuations and deforestation, and not surprisingly, he continues his work on mortality in Latin America, but he now began working on fertility issues. That was a little bit late in the 90s. And also an important methodological contribution, you might remember a book collection from USSP actually, that he wrote with Jacques Ballan and Stan de Souza on measurement of analysis of mortality with new approaches. By the 2000s, that's when Alberto emerges now into the Hispanic paradox, which allows us to see his careful data analysis and theoretical approaches to refine the paradox. He also wrote on living arrangements of older adults and introduced consideration of selection processes that some already referred to. That was a main part of Alberto's presidential address. This time in the early 2000s actually coincided with Alberto's involvement in data collection in Latin America. Major data collections, I'll come back to this point in a minute. In the last years, in the last decade, Alberto came back to the issue of early life conditions and their impact on adult health outcomes with a focus not only on Latin America, but also in other low and middle income countries. So this is a work in which I've been extremely grateful to be part of with Alberto. As is characteristic of Alberto's work, he immediately zoomed in the formal demography of these processes and introduced the idea of Parker frailty, delayed effects, and the more generally, he conceives that the theories of developmental origins of health and disease could actually work as an overarching umbrella from which population-level impacts of early life conditions can be linked with adult mortality, morbidity, and disability. And he does this not only on a theoretical basis, but also using the formal demography that pinpoints precise expectations and hypotheses that one might actually try to test. For me, I think that's a major achievement. A common thread running to all his work is the consistent emphasis on understanding long-run demographic changes in Latin America. I'm just going to give you one example of the many that he has contributed to the research. This, for me, is perhaps the most impactful of all, for several reasons. He painstakingly, diligently worked with colleagues for at least 3 decades in assembling, evaluating, adjusting, and producing the most comprehensive repository of mortality history of Latin America, what he called the Latin American Mortality Database, also known as Lambda. The acronym is for another time. You might want to ask Alberto. That's another part of the story. So this is actually a great project that actually began when Alberto was a graduate student at the University of Washington. You could ask Sam Preston for more details about it. There are actually several morals to this story. The main one, I think, is for graduate students and for faculty, there is always the hope you're going to finish that project that you're slingering there from grad school. Alberto and his colleagues actually amassed an incredible amount of population-level data that includes censuses going back to the 1800s, vital statistics from the 1900s, survey data from the 60s onwards when it became available, all population reports from the UN, the WHO, the CELADE, and other resources relevant to population studies. I think this is a major advancement in population studies and a major accomplishment of producing a scientifically sound mortality history of Latin America for the last 150 years, including 19 countries in the region. Lambda, I believe, will greatly improve the study of long demographic change in the region. It will allow us to identify new patterns of adult and old age mortality, allow us to document a century of Latin American mortality decline, and I think it will provide the foundation of new empirical analysis in the region. This project, I believe, represents Alberto's lifetime effort of understanding long-run demographic changes and demographic processes in Latin America. As if his contributions were not enough, Alberto has written papers in English, French, Italian, and Spanish, with a wide range of production. I believe Alberto's work has clearly transcended time. It will transcend time, and Lambda, the dataset, will attest to that. And his work, I think, will contribute to influence the next generation of population scientists in similar ways as it has contributed to influence my thinking and my research. So I'm very happy and congratulate Alberto on all this accomplishment and being the 2019 IU SSP laureate. Thank you.